Good morning. Welcome to episode 46 of the Driller Newscast, your weekly update on the news and stories impacting the water and drilling industry. I'm your host, Brock Yordy, and this week in the news, Texas has filed the first challenge against WOTUS. Next, the American Petroleum Institute, along with ExxonMobil, have submitted a petition to the Supreme Court challenging the Administrative Procedure Act and the Coastal Zone Management Act, preventing permitting of fracking in the outer continental shelf. Our feature this week, we will dive into the impact of the 23 days of historic rain from atmospheric rivers and how it has impacted the Western United States drought. But before we jump into the news, let's talk consequences of willfully ignoring OSHA regulations, creating unsafe conditions. For this week in safety, you guessed it, we're talking about willful violations. And we've talked about this several times with trench collapses, confined spaces, those type situations. And this is how it is, everybody. Trench collapses and cave-ins pose the greatest threat to trenching and excavation workers. In the newscast, we've stated that 26 men died in 2022. However, OSHA recently stated in 2022, at least 39 industry workers died, and 22 of them in the first 6 months of the year, which we covered when they did the safety stand down. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that 166 workers died in trench collapses from 2011 to 2018. Now, here's the major story to this. As we think about endangering individuals, unsafe acts, unsafe conditions, what are the ultimate consequences? In June, when OSHA came out and said, we will be investigating all of these, and when we're done, we will turn over our findings to the police for a criminal investigation. Here's one that happened in November of 2021. The owner of a Vail construction company is facing a felony manslaughter charge. He is surrendered to the local law enforcement after the Summit County judge, Edward J. Cassius, issued an arrest warrant on January 23rd, 2023. This was related to the findings of a federal safety investigation into a deadly trench collapse that happened in November 2021. In May 2022, the U.S. Department of Labor Occupational Safety and Health Administration cited Peter Dillon, owner of a now defunct A4S LLC company, after a worker installing residential sewer pipes suffered a fatal injury when the trench collapsed around him, trapping him. The collapse resulted from deteriorating conditions at the project, which A4S could have prevented by using legally required trench protection systems. OSHA issued 3 willful citations to A4S for not ensuring the excavation was inspected by a competent person, failing to instruct employees on the recognition and avoidance of unsafe conditions, and not having a trench protective system in place. Investigators also issued an additional serious citation for not having a safe means of egress within 25 lateral feet of the employees working in the trench. The agency proposed penalties of $449,583 and placed the company in OSHA's Severe Violators Enforcement Program. The department referred the case to the 5th Judicial District Attorney's Office, recommending criminal charges for A4S's refusal to require safety protection despite worsening trench conditions that included at least one trench collapse. A4S has since shuttered, and Dillon agreed to forfeit any future ownership, leadership, or management position that involves trenching or excavation, or the oversight of workplace safety and health. There is no excuse for Peter Dillon's failures to protect workers when federal requirements clearly outline and require safety measures proven to save lives, explained Regional Solicitor of Labor John Rainwater in Dallas. Today's arrest by the Summit County Sheriff's Office cannot recover a life lost in the senseless tragedy but it is a step towards seeking justice for the family. Let this tragedy serve as a reminder to other employers who willingly fail to their responsibilities to keep workers safe that the U.S. Department of Labor will exhaust every resource to hold employers accountable for protecting workers, including recommending criminal prosecution. OSHA has pledged to work with state prosecutors to raise the stakes in appropriate trenching death cases. And this is an example, added OSHA Regional Administrator Jennifer S. Rouse in Denver. OSHA has a national emphasis program on trenching and excavations. Trenching standards require protective systems on trenches deeper than 5 feet. Additionally, trenches must be inspected by a knowledgeable person and have a safe means of entering and exiting prior to allowing a worker to enter. Slope, shore, bench, engineered protective systems, having competent people on site. These are all very important to this. And it's terrible to lose a friend, a colleague, a brother, a coworker, and then for the criminal investigation to start and realize that manslaughter can be time in prison. It's a terrible situation, and we've seen this from Boston to Washington to Texas, now in Vail, Colorado. We have to be smart out there. There's plenty of training programs online and in person. It's a national incentive program to emphasize trench safety. We just can't have these type of situations to continue. We all have the right on the job site to say stop. If you feel unsafe, say stop. If you see an unsafe act happening, say stop. It is your right. Be safe out there. This week in the news, you guessed it, Texas is the first state to challenge the waters of the United States. And on January 18, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton announced he has filed a challenge against the new EPA and Army Corps of Engineers definition of which waterways and wetlands are subject to federal permitting requirements. His statement: legal action is necessary to curtail this administration's continued intrusion into the rights of Texans and our ability to control our own natural resources. I am proud to file this lawsuit challenging Biden's WOTUS rule and remain committed to pushing back against the Biden's administration's radical climate agenda. The announcement came after the Texas oil and gas regulators approved a motion urging Paxton to challenge the new rule. It's time to start suing, said Texas Railroad Commissioner Christy Craddock during an agency meeting. Remember, the oil and gas industry is regulated through the Texas Railroad Commission. Go back and watch the movie There Will Be Blood. You know, there's plenty of oddities when it comes to how regulation works in different states for groundwater, oil and gas, mining. I think the AG is going to have a good time with this one. Also, Texas Railroad Commissioner. Right behind that, North Dakota is also jumping into the fight, with Governor Doug Burgum saying he is looking forward to supporting North Dakota's Attorney General in challenging the new rule. This came in a statement last week. It's disappointing that the Biden administration is doubling down on this oversight policy, Burgum said in a statement. The EPA reworked version of WOTUS has the same problem as its predecessors, violating landowners' rights and creating confusion for farmers, ranchers, and industry by adding red tape and erroneously classifying almost every stream, pond, and wetland as a federally managed water. And again, here's a statement from the president of the American Farm Bureau Federation, Zippy Duval, stating, clean water is important to us all. Unfortunately, the new WOTUS rule once again gives the federal government sweeping authority over private lands. This isn't what clean water regulations were intended to do. Farmers and ranchers should not have to hire a team of lawyers and consultants to determine how we can farm our land. American Farm Bureau Federation and other agricultural plaintiffs include the National Cattlemen Beef Association, National Pork Producers, National Corn Growers Association, the U.S. Poultry and Egg Association, the Texas Farm Bureau, and the Matagorda County Farm Bureau in Texas. Beyond those plaintiffs challenging it, the National Home Builders Association, National Association of Realtors, and the American Petroleum Institute. We're going to talk about the massive rains and atmospheric rivers in our feature this week. But a big argument here, and this is why it's very important to go back and listen to the Waters of the United States roundtables, is ephemeral streams and when they're not streams. And the argument that we're having right now is this a navigable water? No different than the Sackets versus the EPA and this idea of taking land. Here's the deal. Surface water is eventually going to become groundwater. And we have perched aquifers, and we have unconfined aquifers, and we have all kinds of situations. The NASA's doing massive studies right now that we will get into in the next weeks to come that talk about how we're able to map the groundwater movement. But the regulation and making sure that this runoff isn't impacting groundwater, as we realize it's very hard for us right now in this country to determine what the next 50 years look like due to climate change and how we use water. And so we have to protect water. There has to be a fine definition here. And just like Jesse Richardson covered with us, this is going to come from Congress, and we're really going to have to focus on, clean water and how it is accepted and treated state to state, up gradient, down gradient. Big piece here is if we're going to back off on these, as all of these associations want, because of the violation of rights, then the violators that negatively impact these aquifers due to phosphates or nitrates or forever chemicals better have some pretty severe penalties, like we just saw with our discussion about the construction company in Vail. Speaking of the American Petroleum Institute, they have petitioned the Supreme Court in a case that is against the Environmental Defense Center. And this was submitted on January 24th. The American Petroleum Institute has stated whether a programmatic environmental assessment and finding of no significant impact regarding the hypothetical future approval of permits for oil and gas well stimulation treatments in the Coastal Zone Management Act. So here's the deal. We have the Department of Interior that has pushed and said, we need to be able to get as much of our fossil fuels to get off of foreign dependence. We see what's happening with Russia. We see what happens with OPEC. And we have all of this, about 10 billion barrels of oil just off the coast of California. However, the Environmental Defense Center has wanted more conclusions on what the fracking would look like and how it would be done responsibly. And this has turned into a Supreme Court discussion. And almost just like the WOTUS of the United States stuff going on right now, they're all hypothetical fracking concerns. And the problem is these legal challenges need a more specific decision. And the Ninth Circuit Court upheld that there would be the Department of Interior and the state of California determining what could be permitted or not. And if we are to continue to have development of oil and natural gas along with renewable energies, we need that oil that's in the outer continental shelf. So this is just a petition right now, but let's see where this goes as well. Some pretty big things happening for our environment in water and in fossil fuels. For this week's feature, I want to talk about the 9 atmospheric rivers that made landfall along the California coast from December 26th through January 17th. One of the atmospheric rivers was exceptional. 4 were strong and 4 were moderate. What is an atmospheric river and when did this become a buzzword? Atmospheric rivers are relatively long, narrow regions in the atmosphere. They're like a river in the sky that transport most of the water vapor outside of the tropics. These columns of vapor move with the weather, carrying an amount of water vapor roughly equivalent to the average flow of water at the mouth of the Mississippi River. When most atmospheric rivers make landfall, they often release this water vapor in the form of rain or snow. So we just had this massive event of rain that has been discussed at somewhere between 25 and 30 trillion gallons of water. So what does that mean for the Western United States right now? Well, last week, drought.gov released its report, and this was the findings. 92% of California is still in a drought. 100% of Nevada is in a drought. 64% of Oregon is in a drought. 69% of Idaho is in a drought. 96% of Utah is in a drought. 21% of Arizona is in a drought. So this is what the report stated about this significant 23-day event. Overall snowpack is well above average in parts of the West, but it is very early in the water year. To begin to alleviate long-term hydrogeologic drought and contribute to spring and summer runoff, snow needs to continue to accumulate during the winter. Above average precipitation over the next 3 to 5 years, combined with water conservation focused resource management, would be needed to completely alleviate long-term hydrologic droughts. There's notable records here that say California had the wettest 23-day period on record, including Oakland, San Francisco International Airport, and Stockton, recording numerous daily maximum rainfall records where they were either broken or tied in California from December 27, 2022 to January 17th. In California, 80% of a full average season of snowpack was deposited during these massive atmospheric river events. They helped improve short-term drought conditions in California's Central Valley, Southern California, and the Sierra Nevada mountains. In the short term, the benefits from these extraordinary storms include ample snowpack, increased top-level soil moisture, and filling of reservoirs. Despite the reduction in the drought severity, the rapid pacing of these atmospheric rivers caused flooding and led to road closures, dangerous travel conditions, debris flows, and evacuations. It was estimated that 30 trillion gallons of water came down in this 23-day period. All we've seen on social media, the news outlets, everywhere. Why didn't we just capture all this water? It's not that easy. We need to think about the physics of capturing that water combined with the magnitude of the storms creating chaos. Next, we have to consider our stormwater systems are 80 to 100 years old with very little investment in infrastructure. Many updates and reconsiderations of stormwater capture started with the federal infrastructure law funding from this past summer. I want you to consider that an acre-foot is 326,000 gallons. And just to clear the air, that really is 325,851 gallons. But we've all been just screaming it's 326,000 gallons. Currently, California can capture 630,000 acre feet of water. Their goal with the federal infrastructure dollars is to invest 200 million into being able to capture 1 million acre feet by 2030. 1 million acre feet is 326 billion gallons. Think about that. There's 14 million acre feet in the Colorado River. And as this drops, we should have the new news from the Department of Interior and those 7 Colorado River Compact states on what the reduction of 30% of water looks like. And we're right now just trying to catch 1 million acre feet in California for reuse. 30 trillion gallons of water is 98,159,509 acre feet of water. Where do we hold it? As these excessive rain events happen, the turbidity of that water goes up. We have 80 to 100-year-old stormwater infrastructure. And this was, again, a big discussion of Waters of the United States roundtables. We can dam rivers and we can start reservoirs that way. But when we have 23 days of 30 trillion gallons of water being dumped, and you look at all the damage and the debris flows and the mudslides and the roads out and all of the damage, considering that water weighs 8.34 pounds per gallon, and now we're trying to hold back 326 billion gallons to save, we just don't have the ability to catch. And as climate change continues, this is what we keep talking about, from the flooding in Mississippi to the flooding in Kentucky. Every major flood event we've seen is we can't handle the water fast enough. And now we're saying we need to capture it. We need to capture as much as we can, and we have to invest in that. So that's where our federal infrastructure dollars are going. We got to be able to feed households that need about 110,000 gallons a year, the average household. We got to be able to get the crops and the livestock, and we got to sustain that farmland. And now it's fully back to those ephemeral streams and those navigable waters, and what is a ditch versus a gully versus a stream or a creek. And as we have that massive flooding event, what land applied or forever chemicals are running into that water that is now heading that way. We got a lot more to talk about on this. And we're going to get some environmental engineers involved and some hydrogeologists, meteorologists, and we're going to do a roundtable on this and see if we can't get a good question and answer from all of you out there that want to learn more about this. It's a pretty big piece, and it all comes right back to protecting our groundwater. And how do we do that? Thank you for joining us for episode 47 of the Driller Newscast. There's a lot going on that is challenging water quality, our ability to be able to do, the drilling that's appropriate. We need to know who's lobbying and whose voices are being heard, and understanding how this impacts our environment and what side of the table are we on. We should be on the educated side that wants to protect Mother Nature, provide water, clean water, understand water conservation is now a 21st century concept that we need to continue, and capturing that water and sending it into ASR wells or into reservoirs or whatever we have to do to be a smarter civilization. Check out thedriller.com. In just a couple of days, the digital edition of the February magazine will come out. And let's have a great start to February. Thanks.